Okay, so this is a video by a scientist. He's a New Zealand scientist. And just a quick disclaimer here, this falls under the free use clause of the Digital Millennium Copyright Act because of education and to a lesser degree entertainment for my viewers. And so I'm going to present this scientist's findings and just sort of discuss aspects of it with my viewers for clarification and education regarding research that's happened in Antarctica. This is particularly focused on West Antarctica, but it applies to the entire continent. The reason this is relevant at this time of year is, of course, is that the permafrost in Antarctica, or in the Arctic, is freezing again. It's the winter up there, and so Antarctica is experiencing warming conditions. And as you can see, this is not going to be. It's not a particularly pleasant thing to be happening in Antarctica at the moment. So let's have a look.
A tipping point is something that happens to the climate system that's irreversible on human timeframes. You can't get back to the old climate state, not for potentially millennia. The one that matters for Antarctica is essentially the point at which the ice shelves are all gone. And that will cause very rapid sea level rise above the levels of the current projections.
Okay, so this is an interesting point that he's making here. This projection about sea level rise, it's something that I've been skeptical about because yes, sea levels are going to rise, but not before the end of the century is what we've been told, right? They're saying 2 meters or so by 2100. Now, my contention is highly unlikely that there's going to be any humans left on the planet to witness the sea level rise. So it's always been, to me, it's been an indication that whatever pundit is talking about climate change, and it's generally by the politicians or reporters that mention sea level rise. So it's quite a common thing to see this on the news of an evening, that there's going to be the sea level rise. And it's always indicated to me that these people aren't really aware of the issues, because sea level is going to rise after the climate has changed significantly and people have mostly starved to death. That's been my understanding. What this guy is saying is a lot more interesting regarding the changes that are likely to occur. Now, when I say likely, it's because what's going to stop this tipping point from happening, from tipping? You know, what would stop this? Cooling the seas down. How do you think humans could possibly do that? Let's keep watching.
So the Antarctic ice sheet itself sits on continental bedrock. But the ice essentially flows from a high point to a low point, then it hits the ocean, and so it flows onto the ocean, it floats on the ocean, and we call that the ice shelf. The Ross Ice Shelf is a spectacular example. It's the biggest ice shelf in the world, size of France, size of Texas. But there are ice shelves all around the coast of Antarctica, and what these ice shelves do is they hold back the ice flowing off the continent, and they slow down the dynamic flow of ice under gravity into the ocean. Unfortunately, these ice shelves are all melting, they're all thinning because the ocean is warming, and in some places around West Antarctica it's warming a lot.
So I've seen studies done showing that there are warm currents, ocean currents, underneath the ice shelves in this particular part of Antarctica. Now, this guy's not mentioning that. It's fair to say that it's a relative warmth, in that it may only be 1 or 2 degrees warmer than the surrounding seas, but that's enough to severely degrade the ice at the ice shelf's most vulnerable point, which is the grounding point, and you'll see this in a diagram shortly. It's where the ice shelf comes out and hits the ground or the seabed, and that holds it back and enables it to hold the glaciers back on the land. So two things you could do is, one is to alter the ocean current's trajectory, the path that the ocean current takes. That could be a geoengineering feat of wonder that could be looked at, and the other thing is to cool the oceans down somehow. One of the contentions I've got there is that Antarctica is actually not owned by any single country, and so a consensus would have to be attained or reached from all the stakeholders before anything could be done on either of those two scenarios, or one that I haven't thought of, that there may be others, but a consensus would have to be reached first, and with the geopolitical climate as it is at the moment, that is, I would say, not viable, not feasible, especially in any significant time frame. So we'll see what he's got to say.
The Larsen Ice Shelf, for example, the size of England, and it essentially disintegrated in a couple of months. Then what happened? The glaciers feeding the Larsen Ice Shelf sped up 10 times. So we're seeing that happen all around Antarctica, and what we think is that there will be a threshold whereby the ocean warms and all those ice shelves are going to pretty much go at once, and they're going to go very, very fast, and once they go, then there's nothing to stop the rest of the ice sheet just sliding into the ocean. Now there's another wrinkle here, another instability. So West Antarctica essentially sits in a big bowl below sea level. Large parts of it are 2 kilometres below sea level. So that warm ocean nibbles away at the edges and gets into the soft underbelly. You can imagine you've got this ice sheet flowing into the ocean, but as it retreats into the bowl, the edges of the ice sheet start to lose the grip on the side of the bowl. It's clinging on to the edges, but it's about to slip off. There's nothing for them to hold on to anymore. And so what happens is it's like a bunch of dominoes falling over. These ice cliffs just topple. And we've seen that in Jakobshavn Glacier up in Greenland. It's an incredible thing to watch. These immense ice cliffs, 30 kilometres long, just boom. And if that really plays out at large scale around Antarctica, we're grossly underestimating the amount of sea level rise from Antarctica.
Yeah, so what he's referring to here is Antarctica, with regard to the climate models and projections into the future, etc. Antarctica was always assumed that it was a very stable part of the jigsaw puzzle, so to speak, the climate system, a very stable part due to the fact that it was a continental mass with the ice, and the ice was essentially locked onto the continental rock, the bedrock that he mentions here. It's proved, well, this research here is showing that that's not necessarily the case, and also that he mentions the Larsen ice shelf slipping, disintegrating into the sea. Now that was a satellite photography that we were showing there, time lapse of course, and that shocked the scientific community around, I think it was from memory about 2012, I think that sort of thing happened. Might have been slightly after that, but it was around about that time. And there were three that just went one after another, A, B and C, Larsen A, B and C, they all just collapsed. And they're saying that was the size of England. Now apparently one of those massive icebergs is still floating in the ocean today from that collapse. So when he says that you're going to get this dominoes falling into the ocean and it's going to affect sea level rise, that won't be an immediate overnight sort of effect. Geologically it's the blink of an eye, but as far as humans are concerned, there's a potential there that if the coastal cities, areas where people live, if they act fast enough, they may be able to erect seawalls before the worst of this sea level rise occurs. I mean, I can't see it happening. I don't think that we humans are smart enough to say, oh, hold on a minute, let's put the war in Ukraine aside for a while we try to protect our low-lying cities from the inundation. It's just, I'm sorry to say, but that's my take on just how stupid humans can be and how pig-headed, But yeah, like he's saying, this is going to happen. Like he's not saying if it could happen. He's saying this will happen, and this is. He then goes on to tell us why.
Ultimately, the key thing is carbon dioxide warming the climate. The natural climate cycles, which have regulated the ice ages, occur exactly in step with the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. In other words, it is the pacemaker of Earth's climate. And CO2, the greenhouse gases, and Earth's temperature are totally locked. We know from ice core records and geologic records that you have to go back 3 million years to see a time when our planet last had 400 parts per million carbon dioxide on the atmosphere.
Right, so that graph that he's displaying there is as accurate as the data that we have can make it, and it's solid data. There's no contention about that. It's drill cores and tree ring data, etc. and the point he makes here is it's for 420 parts per million. Now, that 400, where you see that line at the end there where it's almost vertical, what's important there is it's the rate of change that's unprecedented in this record that he's showing here. And there's a lag, right? This is the important thing to understand, is the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere shows where the temperature is going to go, if you like. Okay, so there's a lag between the amount of CO2 and the temperature change. And so that means that we've got CO2 at 420 parts per million already. Now it's 422 nearly. And we're just starting to see the temperature rising to meet that 420 parts per million. And we've got to go back 3 million years before we can find a similar concentration of CO2 in a similar climate. Humans, at the moment, we think humans have been on the planet for 250,000 years. So humans have never lived in a climate that has 420 parts per million CO2. Never in their entire evolutionary footprint on the planet. So if I listen to the economists on this, so beyond Lomberg, etc., who are saying, there are benefits to high CO2 levels, and there are. Okay, the lush plant life. I'm here in the tropics at the moment, and it's lush tropical environment, beautiful weather as far as I'm concerned. I hope it lasts. It's possible that in the future the temperature is so high that it's denaturing the vegetation, denaturing the plants, and drying everything off, and we've gone from lush to desert rapidly. Obviously I hope that doesn't happen, but of course that is what it looks like is going to happen. But of course the future's very difficult to predict, as we can see. So I think what we can see here is that the ice shelves around Antarctica are more than likely going to slip into the sea. We've seen it before. He's shown us the ice cliffs falling off I can't pronounce the glacier up north there in Greenland. I have actually personally witnessed ice cliffs falling off around glaciers. Personally witnessed that as a teenager. Not on that scale. I went 3 kilometres long or whatever he says there. But yeah, it's a tremendous sight. It's something I've never forgotten. So yeah, 420 parts per million and climbing, and with the COPs there's no sign of it stopping at all. And obviously, I think it should be obvious to everyone today that just turning off the spigots and shutting down the coal-fired power plants, it's not going to work. It ain't going to happen. So we're locked in for the ride, and hopefully humans can survive it.
Here we have the Andril drill system sitting here on the Ross Ice Shelf. We made a hole 84 metres.
So one of the areas of research I've spent much of my life doing is drilling sediment cores from around the Antarctic margin. We drilled back to sediments that were 3 million years old to answer that question when CO2 is at 400 parts per million or higher. What happened to Antarctica? What happened to the sea ice? What happened to the ice sheet? How warm did it get? To give us information about the world we're heading into. And we were able to reconstruct what was living in the Ross Sea, and it was algae. And we know that this algae lives north of the polar front these days in the subantarctics. So we know that the Ross Sea was 5 degrees warmer than present, no sea ice, and we know that the Ross ice shelf had collapsed. There is no West Antarctic ice sheet. And not only that, we know from other drilling projects that big parts of the East Antarctic ice sheet also disappeared. Global sea level records from around the world tell us that sea level was about 20 metres higher. So the Paris target says we must limit global warming to less than 2 degrees. And this is one of the reasons. It's a tipping point for the Antarctic ice sheet. Even if we achieve the Paris target, we'll get 50 centimetres of sea level rise in a century. That's baked in from the heat that's already in the system. People underestimate what 50 centimetres really means for us globally. 800 million people around the world are going to be affected by high tide flooding. It's the rising sea level, but it's also the storms that are on top of that rising sea level. And so, Hurricane Sandy that wiped out big parts of Manhattan.
Water is splashing over the seawalls at the tip of lower Manhattan.
Those sort of coastal flooding events will be an annual occurrence. And we can't avoid that. That's locked in. So we've got to adapt to living in a warmer world. The latest generation of ice sheet computer models are incorporating these instabilities, predict up to 2 metres of sea level rise a century, unless we aggressively reduce our emissions.
Yeah. So this is what I like about this particular video, is that this is a research scientist. He's gone down to the ice. He's spent his life drilling these holes, looking at these drill cores, analysing them. And this is the horse's mouth speaking here, saying, we're locked in at the moment, locked into 50 centimetre sea level rise by the end of the century. Now, he also goes on to say that, if we meet our Paris targets, below 2 degrees. Well, that's not going to happen. The pledges that have been made already, 2.4 degrees Celsius to 2.8 degrees Celsius average global temperature by 2050, I think is the metric that's been bandied around. Now, it goes on to say if we drastically cut our emissions, and that's not going to happen. The major emitters are China, USA and India. Now, one thing to note is that the ocean-going ships and the air transport systems are not included in any of these targets or emissions schemes or what have you. None of it is. So the ocean transport is a major emitter of greenhouse gases, and also sulfates, which is handy because that has the albedo effect incorporated into it. So these emissions targets, the pledges don't meet them. There is no way that the emissions are going to be cut drastically any time at all. Right? They're just not. It's just not going to happen. It doesn't matter how many people glue themselves to the motorways or whatever. It is not going to happen. It can't happen because there is no alternative fuel source or energy source to coal, natural gas and oil. There isn't any alternative. People talk about renewables. They're not reliable energy sources, and our energy requirements are increasing globally. So none of, he holds out the hope that the emissions can be cut. What has to happen is CO2 has to be removed from the atmosphere, and that technology is in its absolute infancy, if it's viable at all. And at the moment, the major money is being spent on arms to Ukraine. The priorities are all wrong to stop these ice shelves from falling into the sea, and they're just going to do it. Now, we've seen that it can happen over a period of months with something the size of England. He's talking about an ice sheet here the size of France or Texas. So it might take 4 months for it to collapse into the ocean. It might take 6 months. But that amount of fresh water dropping into the ocean enough to raise global sea levels by 20 metres. I think it's 20 metres, so it might be 2 metres. Nevertheless, fresh water going into the oceans, what effect could that have? Well, that will change the salinity of the oceans. It may have a positive effect on the acidity of the oceans. We might be able to save some crustaceans and corals and whatnot. It may cool the oceans down somewhat. It may also enable the oceans to absorb CO2. Oceans do absorb CO2. They're kind of at their limit now, but if we put a lot more water in there, who knows? We're going to find out, right? Don't make any mistake about that. We're going to find out exactly what it does, and in rapid time, by the looks of it. So, what is important about this video is that this is actually a scientist who's got down on the ice, drilled the cores, analysed them. He knows what he's talking about. He's not pulling any punches. And like he says, we're locked into this now, but try and do something about it, which isn't going to get done. So we're looking at, by the end of the century, if anyone's still alive to see it, major fucking problems. Hopefully, if you see this video and you can do anything about it, well, get off your ass and do something. I can't do anything about it. I can bring this to your attention.
People feel it's a hopeless situation, and it's not a hopeless situation. In fact, the science tells us we still have a chance to solve this problem, get on top of it anyway, and avoid the worst. Just in the last few years, we were seeing a sea change in the world. Young people in the streets protesting, pissed off. Politicians starting to take it more seriously, governments starting to really make it a top priority. We can all limit our carbon footprint hugely. It requires a global response. If we take action, we create a better world, both in terms of how we save the climate and in terms of how we save ourselves.
Yeah, so there you go. He says, it needs a global response. Now, he also mentions your carbon footprint. The largest corporations in the world, the top 100 corporations in the world, are responsible for 70% of the global emissions. Right, and an individual's global carbon footprint is irrelevant. Now, having said that, they also bandy about the fact that the top 1% have the largest carbon footprint with their private jets and private yachts and whatnot. China's building one coal-fired power station a week at the moment, still doing it. Have been doing it for a long time. So you can recycle as much as you like. You can ride a bike to work twice a week, or whatever makes you feel good about the climate. You can try, but it's not down to the people. In my view, it's not down to individuals. We can, I do my best. My power bill here is less than $20 a month. That's as best I can get it down to. It's $20 Australian a month. Now, is there more I can do regarding that? Yes, there is, and I'm trying. But it's the effect it has on the 420 parts per million CO2 is never. It's not going to affect anything. Okay. And if we all did it, it would still not have any effect whatsoever. It's the major emitters are the ones that have to stop emitting, and they're not going to. Right, this is what we have to understand. They're not going to, and until they do, nothing's going to change. We are locked in to this sea level rise, and I didn't think I'd be saying that because I thought it was something that I wouldn't see in my lifetime, but there's a good chance that I'm going to see the start of it in my lifetime, which I find surprising. But you won't hear any of this on mainstream TV. You won't hear that there's a chance that not a chance, a likelihood that these things are going to collapse into the ocean in the next few years. So, be aware, do what you can to save your family, is my view. It's going to be down to individuals to try to survive, in my view. It's because the corporations and the COP27s are not going to be. They're not doing anything. I mean, the point thing is, they're not doing anything, and they have had ample opportunity to do something, but there's all these non-binding agreements that the governments are making, and they're just that. They're just words. There's no, every year we get more emissions rather than less. This is where we are. We get people like Bjorn Lomborg, who I respect. Don't get me wrong. I respect what he's done and what he wants and what he says. I respect that greatly. But it's talk. We need action. So if he could put his brain towards actually steering the world towards a better place quickly, I'd like him to try. I'm not in a position to do so. I don't have that access to the information that he does, or that level of academic endeavour that he has. He's a doctor, so he's got contacts in that level. I don't have those, so I can put forward some suggestions, but they're not based on the information that he has at his fingertips. So let's get some bigger brains and mind together and try and sort this thing out, because the clock's ticking and nothing is getting done at this COP27, the UN level. Nothing is getting done. It hasn't been done. It's not going to get done. Well, it's time to stop with the COPs and find another solution in the next 12 months. And that's not going to get done. So